Hello and welcome to Written Words. I'm Helen and today I want to share a story with you. It's a very old story that was written by Nikolai Karamzin in 1797. Nikolai Karamzin was a Russian writer who wrote in the sentimentalist tradition. And if you've watched some of my earlier videos, you may have come across my book, Sentimental Tales, which is an exploration of Karamzin's work. It contains some of my translations of his stories and poems, as well as other stories and poems by writers who influenced him or were influenced by him. But the story I'm going to share today is one that isn't in this book. It's by Karamzin, but it isn't in this collection. It's an extra one that I translated. It is the story of a character called Liodor. He is a rather odd character, and the story bears a lot of the hallmarks of Karamzin's writing. It follows the typical lyrical, idyllic style of the sentimentalist movement in literature. And it contains a lot of evidence of Karamzin's travels around Western Europe and his knowledge of Western European languages and literature of the time. And the ending of the story might seem a little odd and slightly abrupt to 21st century readers, although it is typical of many of Karamzin's stories. So here is my translation of Liodor by Nikolai Karamzin. Cold winds were already casting pallor and gloom over sorry nature when Agathon, Isidore and I went to the countryside to enjoy the melancholy autumn. I will always remember that autumn which we spent so pleasurably. Never will I forget our walks together, when we would sit on the withered grass of the tall hill, look out over the deserted fields and the sparse, dismal groves, and listen to the noise of the gusting wind that scattered the yellow leaves. We would feel a flutter in our hearts and embrace each other in eloquent silence. Happy the one who has a tender soul, a soul which notices all the movements of nature and changes its feelings accordingly, blossoming and fading with her. Everything that appears before a person's eye in the vast field of creation enhances existence and is an object of delight. Every tear shed gives birth to a new joy, sometimes mysterious and inexplicable, but the more deeply the tear is felt, the more blissful the joy. That same mortal is 100 times happier, though, upon finding a like-minded person whose soul is also a pure mirror of nature. What can compare with the swiftness of that movement with which they hasten to embrace each other at first glance, then conclude in the eyes of heaven that eternally sacred union of friendship, a union as firm as the earth's foundations? Who can describe the incomparable pleasure with which they communicate their sympathies to each other, sometimes silently, with only a glance or a handshake? Merciful heaven! At this very moment my tears are rolling down onto the paper, tears of sorrow. Ah, no, they are the tears of tenderness and gratitude. Although you, my dear, gentle Agathon and sensitive Isidore, were hidden from my view, just as the delightful dreams of a summer's night vanish at dawn, your blossoming image still remained in my heart, and often, on the breeze that blows over your graves, I can hear a comforting, kindly voice. Only a thin veil separates us, and it too will soon be lifted. Forgive me, dear Aglia. I am rekindling your grief, but you yourself have ordered me to speak about our friends. How could the tears in my eyes possibly be restrained? We had been staying in the countryside for over a month, and none of us felt bored. Squally winds frequently rattled the windows in our ancient house and howled mournfully in the flue pipe from the stove in front of which we would sit in the evenings. The fields were often covered with snow, but we still went walking in them, fearing neither blizzards nor snowstorms. Whilst enjoying nature and friendship, our hearts felt no emptiness, and therefore we did not seek to make the acquaintance of the local gentry, who might have interrupted the flow of our pleasant moments and become a burden to us. However, fate did want us to meet one of them, and his memory will forever be sacred to me. One morning the noise of the wind woke me earlier than usual. My friends were still sleeping soundly. I took my staff, the very same, dear Aglaia, that you once gave me, and which has been my faithful companion on all my travels far and wide, and went into the grove adjoining our garden. Imagine my surprise when, standing beneath the gnarled branches of the tall oak tree, I spied a young man in a black frock-coat, who was a perfect stranger to me, and in fact quite unlike anyone I had ever set eyes on in my life. He had a handsome, intelligent face, with large, dark, fiery eyes, like the clear mirror of a great soul. His forehead was high and exposed, with 3 or 4 evenly spaced deep lines, which showed experience and sorrows endured. His pale cheeks were of the subtlest pink, and there was something else that is impossible to describe, yet has the most powerful effect on the heart. In short, dear Aglaia, imagine you had seen a second Isidore at the age of 27 after a serious ailment of the heart, standing in an avenue in D. Garden. As he leaned on the bough of a tree, he seemed lost in thought. The north wind ruffled his fair, unpowdered hair, and a round hat and white scarf lay at his feet. I watched him for about 3 minutes, without his noticing me. Then he eventually lifted his head, glanced in my direction, and took a step back. I doffed my hat, saying I was pleased to meet him, and offered him my hand. Perhaps it was because my appearance and voice showed him the sincerity of my heart, that he met my hand halfway and shook it with a friendly smile. "Excuse me," I went on, "if my arrival has interrupted your pleasant musings, but this host was eager to meet his honourable guest." "I am your guest," he said in a voice that was in perfect harmony with his face and showed me a new beauty in his soul. "So am I standing on your land?" "My grandfather's remains are laid to rest in this grove." "Then forgive this stranger who has come to such a hallowed place without your leave. He is known to me because I am looking at him." "So do you trust appearances?" "I trust nature and my own heart." "Ah, I have faith in them too." At this point he embraced me, and the warmth of his embrace allowed me to sense the tenderness of his heart. "But tell me," he went on, holding both my hands and looking me in the eye, "tell me, who are you?" In just a few words I satisfied his curiosity, after which the stranger told me that he was a landowner from a neighbouring village and had lived a solitary existence since his recent arrival there. He loved to go for walks, and seeing our grove had ventured into it, not knowing to whom it belonged and not being acquainted with any of his neighbours. "Now you will know 3 of them at least," I said, "and they will endeavour to cheer up your solitude without depriving you of any of its pleasures. Come, 10 paces from here, beneath the humble roof of a small cottage, you will find 2 more hearts which may be sympathetic to you." "So there are 3 of you?" asked Liodor. "But this is too much for one day, or perhaps fate is rewarding me for my enduring patience." He raised his cap, then arm in arm we set off through the garden and came to the house. Isidore and Agathon looked in surprise at the handsome stranger who approached them with arms open wide. "My friends, this is our neighbour," I said. "He is worthy of your love." Then they embraced and loved each other. Liodor told us that he had grown up in foreign parts, had travelled widely, and had only returned to Russia 2 months before. After spending a few weeks in Moscow, he had retreated to the countryside, which he had found most pleasant, even though he sometimes felt a need to share his thoughts with a kindred soul. "If only I had known," he said with a smile, "that I had neighbours like this. But how could I have known to look for you so far from the capital, beyond the sleepy forests, on the edge of Europe, at a time when the autumn storms were even driving the residents out of the villages on the outskirts of Moscow? You truly are remarkable people, my good sirs." We countered that by calling him a remarkable person too. Then we laughed and shook hands with heartfelt delight. Forgetting the time, he stayed with us until midnight, and agreed to spend the night at our house. The next morning we walked together to his village, which was about 4 versts from ours. There, on a high bank, over the river Rieva, stood a large wooden house, built at the beginning of the century, and on the verge of its ultimate demise. Moss, grass, and even trees were growing on its rotting roof. Thousands of pigeons, jackdaws, and other birds were nesting under its eaves, their calls providing a never-ending wild concert. At least 20 windows protruded from the top of the roof, like turrets, and the house itself was surrounded by a moat, which had once been deep, but with time had levelled out in places. This was where Liodor lived with his French valet and 3 servants. Each room was smaller and darker than the last. The wind whistled through the whole place, the doors banged, the window panes rattled, most of them were broken, and the floorboards moved as we walked on them. The owner had chosen the room at the very top for his study, which might once have been called a tower room or a parlour. Tower rooms, or terems, dear Aglia, were where beautiful young maidens would sit in days of yore, pining and looking out over the open fields as they waited for their heart's beloved. Then, when they could not see him coming, they would weep bitter tears from their bright eyes and heave laboured, heartfelt sighs that shook their pale breasts. The Frenchman brought us coffee, and blowing on his hands that were frozen with the cold, he cursed our harsh climate. Then we talked about those times when Russian nobles, having been servants of faith and truth, and having served God, Tsar, and fatherland, would return to their estates and live in their wooden castles like little Tsars. They would go for walks with their neighbours, and in those happy moments when Ossian's cup of joy was being passed around, they would tell each other of their heroic feats and show off the wounds they had received in the service of the fatherland. Liodor stated, with our agreement, that the nobility in those days had more spirit and more firmness of character than now, when we chase off other nations for appearance's sake and abandon everything by which God and nature might distinguish us from other nations on earth. We have abandoned it all, forgotten ourselves, and become students of everything and masters of nothing. From that time onwards, we spent every day with Liodor. We dined together, we walked together, and we spent the evenings together discussing various important subjects, telling each other about things we had noted on our travels, and sharing our thoughts. It is a long time since Liodor and I parted. Entire seas separate us, but even now I can still see him standing before me, and I can still hear his voice. Ah, dear Aglia, how gracious he seemed with his every glance, every word, and every movement. Absolutely everything about him displayed a meek soul, love, and sensitivity. Each utterance that came from his mouth was exceptionally pleasant, even when he spoke about the most ordinary things, because his words always poured straight from his heart, and being warmed by the inner fire of his soul, so to speak, they touched his listeners and set the imaginations of even the coldest people on fire. However, Liodor was not only an able speaker, but he also knew how to listen, so that everyone loved to talk to him, opening their souls to him, and everyone spoke better and more eloquently with him than with anyone else. His appearance, gaze, smile, and tears had such a surprising power that his thoughts and feelings responded perfectly to the debater or the storyteller. Each person could see that Liodor understood him, even when discussing the subtleties of Kant's metaphysics. Every tender heart found a compassionate brother in him, and everyone loved Liodor. We lived this way for about a month. My honourable acquaintance Lavater says that after being with a person for 2 days, from morning until night, a shrewd observer will be able to examine all the crevices of his heart. I think that Lavater is right, and that no pretence can help a person to hide his inner self from keen eyes, although nature, it is true, does not bestow this gift on everyone. In any case, Liodor unwittingly showed us what was hidden within his soul, and we soon noticed that, despite his pleasant smiles, and despite the cheery tone of his demeanour, he possessed a deep-rooted, dark melancholy. Occasionally a flush of colour would appear on his cheeks, breaking through their pallor, and the natural brightness of his eyes would often be concealed by a black cloud, when the mournful night would suddenly spread across his face, which a minute earlier had shone with a noontime joy. Frequently, following a jovial conversation, he would forget himself, fold his arms, raise his eyes heavenwards, and something resembling tears would glimmer in his eyes. Then, returning to his senses, he would smile whilst trying to remember what had just been said. We did not want to be indiscreet, and were afraid of offending him by expressing our regret, no matter how genuine it may be, but we hoped that in time he would open his heart to us. We were not disappointed. One morning we went to his house and found him lying on the bed, tearfully kissing a miniature portrait which hung around his neck. Seeing us, he tried to hide it, but then changed his mind, looked at it again, showed it to us, and with a sad smile said, "Isn't she lovely?" We saw a picture of a pleasant, pretty woman and told him, "She is beautiful." "Was," he said. "She was. She is no longer in this world." With that, Liodor pressed the portrait against his chest with both hands, as if trying to suppress the sighs that sought to escape from it. "My friends," he went on, seeing that we were moved, "my friends, I am taking you into the inner sanctum of my heart. You should know that I have loved, and in such a way that it is only possible to love once in life. Fate, though, deprived me of the woman who was most dear to me, and my heart was veiled in eternal mourning. So, my friends, my affliction is incurable, and even your friendship can only relieve it for a time. I can see the sadness in your eyes. Forgive me." We embraced him, and tears rolled from our eyes. Eventually he put the portrait away, rose and dressed. Then he left the house with us, and sitting on the high bank beside the roaring river, told us, "Here you shall hear my story, of which until now you were only partly aware." We sat down around him, and after collecting his thoughts, Liodor began to speak. I was no more than 12 years old when my father sent me to Leipzig University. There my soul received its first systematic understanding of the things around us and of myself. It was there that I learnt to feel and to be aware of my own emotions. In that place the most learned men of Germany shaped my mind. There, under their guidance, I ventured into the vast field of learning. I surveyed the stores of human knowledge gathered over the course of centuries, and I acquired experience of times gone by. While I was there, my soul grew as well as my body, and the sense of this growth made me unspeakably happy. My heart was at peace, studying delighted me, and periods of rest brought their own pleasures. It was a joyful time. I had been there for about 7 years when I received the sad news of the death of my father. I was moved and upset, but not as upset as a sensitive son should have been at the death of a good father. The reason for this was our long separation, which had weakened the feeling of filial tenderness in my young heart, erasing his image from my memory. If you become fathers one day, my friends, and want your children to love you tenderly, and if the nature of the human heart has not changed by that time, then educate your children at home, and never part with them for too long. The letter from my mother, though, which I received several months later, touched me deeply. It breathed love. Every line, every word went straight to my heart. The grief-stricken wife sought consolation from her son, who was her only remaining treasure in the world. She called him to her bereaved embrace, but asked rather than demanded. "Cheer my woeful loneliness with your presence," she wrote. "Give me back my son, my darling, dearest son, who is now the sole object of my heart's devotion. Sweeten the remainder of my days, and may merciful God reward you for the rest of your life." If your commitment to your studies does not permit you to leave Leipzig any time soon, then at least write and tell me when your dear mother might enjoy one final happiness in her life. The happiness of embracing you, my darling child, of weeping and sobbing with joy, never tiring of looking at you. But if God sees fit to end my days before your return, then rest assured that the object of my last thought, my last emotion, my last tear, and my last sigh was you, my heart's beloved. I drenched the paper with my heartfelt tears, took my leave of my teachers, and with a sad sense of foreboding set off for my homeland, which had become quite foreign to me, and where there was nothing I considered precious except my mother. She lived in a village near Kazan. I hurried there, flew across the courtyard, onto the porch and into the room where I was met by people dressed in black. I began to tremble. My premonition was not wrong. 3 days earlier they had lowered her coffin into the ground. This was the first blow of fate which resonated deep inside my heart. My senses abandoned me. When I recovered, I asked to be taken to her grave. There, my friends, I realized that I had had a mother, and I had lost her. The cold earth was warmed by my tears, and for several days in a row, days of anguish and sorrow, the only consolation I could find was in weeping over her grave. The thought that I could have come to her long before she died, and could have shown her all my love, all the tenderness of a son, and thus made her end a happy one, tormented me terribly. Ah, before she died, I thought, she did not have the comfort of seeing that she had a sensitive son. I fell on my knees for the 1000th time and prayed to God that he might permit her to leave the darkness of the spirit world and turn her gaze back to the world she had left behind, where she might see the feelings in my heart. Eventually the stirrings of grief within me subsided. But for me, my mother's passing covered my entire homeland in darkness, and I felt neither joy nor cheer within its bounds. After shedding a final tear on my mother's grave, and on my father's too, I hastened to leave Russia and resolved to search for consolation in that land whose capital had long been revered as the capital of amusement and pleasure. I arrived in Paris with money and good recommendations. I was received with affection in various homes. I saw marvellous spectacles of all kinds, and my eyes and ears were captivated. Everything summoned me to pleasures and enjoyment. My love of arts and sciences found nourishment everywhere. Scholars and artists cherished and taught me, and I delighted in the general tone of affability and loved the welcoming and noble French. You yourselves have travelled, my friends, and seen many lands and many nations. Tell me, which people can show as much kindness and be quite as obliging to a foreigner as the French? We concurred with Liodor, and he continued with his story. I spent about 3 years in Paris without leaving the place, and the time passed like a delightful dream. Eventually my soul demanded a change of pleasure, and a desire to travel stirred within me. So I went to Spain, to that land of novels which had always attracted my imagination. There I found a beautiful land and a beautiful climate. There, beneath the scorching sun, I plunged into the transparent waters of the calm Guadiana and enjoyed all the delights of its coolness. There I relaxed in groves of palm trees and did not envy Eastern opulence in the slightest. Nevertheless, the poverty, ignorance, and superstitious nature of the population, the multitude of parasites who were given the right to live through the labours of others, and who endeavoured to extinguish every spark of enlightenment amongst the people in order to benefit from their patience for longer, the uncultivated state of the land, the deserted towns and villages, the particular despondency and sleepiness that I saw throughout the whole nation, all of this provoked unpleasant feelings within me, and I sighed for those poor Spaniards who were destitute in the midst of riches, and sad in the embrace of cheerful nature. From there I returned to France and lived in Marseille. In that place, my dear friends, I came to know all the happiness of which nature had made me capable. I came to know it, delighted in it, and then it was taken away from me forever. I loved Marseille so much that I made up my mind to spend several months there. You know that city, the focal point of Eastern trade. You know its famous harbour filled with ships from different countries. You know its beautiful environs, with fertile valleys and hills decorated with flower-filled gardens, and houses arranged in villages or bastides. I came to know the best houses and spent my time either in pleasant company or walking in pleasant solitude. One fine evening I walked further away from the town than usual. The sun, which had been shining in the clear sky, descended towards the green hills and disappeared from view. The moon appeared in its silver robes and quietly rose into the blue vault. Gleaming stars like candles began to shine and sparkle around it. A westerly breeze scattered the fragrance from the flowers with which the fields and meadows of Provence were strewn. I lay on a hilltop and watched the ripples of the Mediterranean Sea, which darkened before my eyes with every passing minute. Night came, quiet and lovely, as can only be appreciated in the southern lands of Europe. In the distance, the town was lit up with myriad lamps, and when it was combined with the surrounding villages and bastides, my eyes beheld something magical. My imagination dreamed. Eventually, I forgot everything around me and became lost in a kind of blissful trance. Suddenly, though, a melodious voice, accompanied by the soft sounds of a guitar, was borne on the wind and caressed my ears, where it agreeably awakened my soul to the sensations on the outside. I began to listen to what the breeze was bringing from behind one of the garden walls. I walked in that direction, approached the wall, then placed my ear to a gap in it, and heard the words of this Chiabrera song, La Violetta, in Italian. Is the violet not lovely indeed? Is it not a charming thing? Does it not ambrosia exude, as it blooms in the morning in spring? Sometimes red, sometimes white is this flower in the beauty of day. It pours forth such sweet delight, though in the grass it is hidden away. What will become of the violet so tender? What will happen when the end is near? Ah, perchance it will languish and wither, then all of a sudden disappear. Never before, my dear friends, had a song filled me with such pleasure as that which I felt then. The voice, it was female, merged with the sounds of the strings, penetrating my very heart and pouring indescribable sweetness into its every fibre. My breast languished in tender emotions. I melted with rapture, and tears streamed from my eyes. Then the singing stopped short. I kept on listening, but it was in vain. The most profound silence reigned all around. I wanted to see the heavenly singer. My heart told me that she was beautiful, and who would not trust a heart? I peered through the gap, but saw only greenery and darkness. I was tormented by curiosity. I walked alongside the wall, and to my pleasant surprise found the door to the garden half open. As you might guess, I did not hesitate to enter, although with utmost care, constantly looking around, creeping from one avenue to another, and afraid to put my whole foot onto the grass in case it made a noise and startled my singer. I spent a long time looking for her without success, and I was beginning to think that she had left the garden when suddenly, through a line of trees, I saw a young Turkish girl sitting beside a clear pool. You have seen her portrait, my friends, but it does not show even 1,000th of her loveliness. If you had seen her there, sitting on a turf seat, her dark, shining eyes staring up at the bright moon which kissed her from on high with its beams, lighting up her snow-white face with scarlet cheeks and lips like a rose untouched by the breath of wind or any mortal hand. If you could only have glanced at her wavering reflection in the crystal water of the pool, an image that even the water itself seemed to admire. Without that, you will find it difficult to understand what I felt as I gazed upon this unknown beauty, standing motionless beneath the branches of the trees and afraid to move so much as a leaf with my breath, lest I interrupt the sacred silence which everything around her was observing. Eventually she rose, such a delightful stature and figure, glanced around, then removed the white turban which glistened with a large oriental pearl, whereupon her black hair cascaded over her shoulders and fell almost to the ground. Then she unbuttoned her upper garment, tossed it aside, a trembling ran through my veins, and I saw a breast whiter than Parian marble, like the full moon, a breast which could have served as a model for Phidias when he was sculpting Venus de Medici. At that moment, darkness covered my eyes, and I saw nothing more. A few moments later, as if through a pleasant dream, I heard a soft splashing coming from the pool. The night was warm, and the Turkish beauty was refreshing herself in the cool crystal. Soon, though, my feelings of intoxication were interrupted by a loud barking. I started and saw a small dog nearby. It rushed at me, snapped at the hem of my clothes, and noisily alerted its mistress to the proximity of a stranger. I must admit that I was alarmed, and did not know what to do. Eventually, I came to my senses, ran in the direction of the gates, was fortunate enough to find them quickly, and left the garden. My watch was showing midnight, so I returned to town and flung myself onto my bed, completely exhausted. And so ends the passionate, lyrical, melodramatic, sentimentalist tale of Liodor. The ending of the story with the young lady bathing in the pool and a dog barking to break the silence is also a feature in the ending of another of the stories in this book, A Night of Our Time, which was inspired by Ovid's tale of Actaeon and Diana. If you enjoyed that story and are interested to read more of Karamzin's stories, there are several more to choose from in Sentimental Tales. You can find out more about the book on my website at writtenwords.uk/books. And I have also made videos of some of the other stories in this collection, so I will put the links to those in the description below. So I'm off now to do some more reading, writing, translating and preparing some more videos. So do watch this space for more to come. Thank you very much for joining me in this video. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And in the meantime, happy reading and happy writing.